In our last episode, we looked at the first 5 verses of chapter 14, which, when contrasted with the reference to the 2 beasts in chapter 13, we get a better understanding of the stark contrast between the seal of God and the mark of Satan. Moving on, today I want to dig deeply into the remainder of the chapter 14 and show how I believe it comprises a transitional narrative pointing towards the events that Yochanan records in chapters 15 through 19. As I have suggested previously, the latter chapters of Revelation are a rounding out of the narrative in chapters 4 through 11, with chapter 12 standing like a dividing wall between the former and the latter chapters. So turning back to chapter 14, verses 6 through 20, we see that Yochanan is conversing with a series of angels that issue forth from the one seated on the throne in the heavenly realm. In these verses, we find the narrative jumps around between many different scenes, just like the changing scenes that occur when a kaleidoscope is turned. However, the scenes being considered in these verses do not follow any chronological pattern. The sequence of the scenes is totally random. Hence, as there are 7 separate events recorded between verses 6 and 20, it is necessary to consider them in a different sequence from the order in which they have been recorded. I will also be adding portions from other chapters of Revelation alongside the events in chapter 14, which will help to show how Revelation's narrative encompasses the whole period between 95 CE and the 8th creative day following the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua. So starting in verse 13 of chapter 14, Yochanan says, "Next I heard a voice from heaven saying, 'Write, how blessed are the dead who die united with the Lord from now on.' Yes, says the Spirit, now they may rest from their efforts, for things they have accomplished follow along with them." In this verse, a voice is speaking about all who set themselves apart through their acceptance of Yeshua as their Mashiach or Messiah. So when they die, they carry with them an assurance that they will have been called and even possibly chosen through the Spirit we now know as the Ruach HaKodesh. The voice does not specify the time that is related to those words, but it does say it is speaking about all who die from now on. Those words suggest that the voice is speaking about those who will die sometime at a stage after the words were given in 95 CE, meaning between the end of the 1st century and our present day in the 21st century. Millions of people who have died acknowledging that Yeshua is their Mashiach, as the angel says, they are blessed. However, we also know that things changed in Yochanan's first vision. As we saw in chapter 1, verse 10, he says, "I came to be in the Spirit on the day of the Lord," meaning that vision, he was actually seeing what was happening during the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua, which of course is yet to come. Therefore, the words of 14:13 appeared to be confined to the period between 95 CE and the return of Yeshua. Now, based on that assumption, the next verse I want to consider is from chapter 18, verse 1, followed along by 14, verse 8, in that order. Now, looking firstly at 18:1, we are told, "After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, and he had great authority, and the earth lit up by his splendor. He cried out with a strong voice, 'She has fallen, Babel the Great.'" In this verse, Yochanan says, "I saw another angel." which I suggest means that he was the first of 3 angels that appeared in rapid succession, with the first angel simply proclaiming, "Baal the Great has fallen." He gives no other details. But when the second angel speaks, in chapter 14, verse 8, Yochanan says, "Another angel, a second one, followed, saying, she has fallen, Babylon the Great. She made all the nations drink the wine of God's fury, caused by her whoring." So what is the significance of the woman's whoring? In the scriptural context, whoring is defined as a metaphorical description of unfaithfulness towards God, particularly through idolatry and pursuit of false gods. The meaning derives from the Hebrew word zana, which means to commit fornication or to be unfaithful. In the broader sense, it encompasses any form of spiritual adultery where the people of God turn away from Yahweh and pursue other deities or world desires. Therefore, in the context of Revelation, we can see that Baal the Great is an ideology that turns people away from Yahweh as being the only and true God. Following on, in chapter 18, verses 2 and 3, he gives us a glimpse of the character of the woman called Baal the Great, and the impact that she has on the world, where the first angel says, "She has become the home for demons, a prison for every unclean spirit, a prison for every unclean, hated bird. For all the nations have drunk the wine of God's fury, caused by her whoring. Yes, the kings of the earth went whoring with her, and from her unrestrained love of luxury, the world's businessmen have grown rich." Those words define the character of the woman of Baal the Great. Then, in 14 verses 9 through 11, Yochanan says, "Another angel, a third one, followed them and said with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives the mark on his forehead or his hand, he will drink the wine of God's fury, poured out undiluted into the cup of his rage. He will be tormented by fire and sulfur before the holy angels and before the Lamb, and the smoke of their tormenting goes up forever and ever." In these verses, the scene has changed yet again, but chronologically it appears to occur at the time of Yeshua's return, and appears to follow straight after the destruction of Baal the Great. Having started with verse 13, I now want to move on and consider verses 14 through 16, where Yochanan says, "Then I looked, and there before me was a white cloud. Sitting on the cloud was someone like the Son of Man, with a gold crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Another angel came out of the temple and shouted to the one sitting on the cloud, 'Start using your sickle to reap, because the time to reap has come. The earth's harvest is ripe.' The one sitting on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested." The Son of Man, as we now know under the name of Yeshua, is the one undertaking that harvesting of the people of the earth. Further, the tone of the narrative suggests that it is a positive harvest, or it is the ingathering of all who've ever lived on the earth, apart from the 144,000 who had a part in the first resurrection, and they would already be in heaven at that stage. The harvest appears to be the second resurrection, but it is not spoken about directly. It's simply implied, because if there's a first resurrection, then it follows there must also be a second. The model we have for the second generation is that of Eleazar, or Lazarus, whom Yeshua raised from death after 4 days. His resurrection was to bring him back to being a flesh and blood human being, whereas those who have part in the first resurrection become immortal, like Yeshua himself at the time of their upward call. Now turning back to chapter 14, verses 6 and 7, Yochanan sees yet another angel and says, "Next I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven with an everlasting good news, proclaiming to all those living on earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. In a loud voice he said, 'Fear God, give him glory, for the hour has come when he will pass judgment. Worship the one who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water.'" It makes perfect sense that with all mankind having been raised in the second resurrection, and during the restorative reign of Yeshua, they will finally face the final judgment during the period when Satan has been let loose for a short period, as described in chapter 20, verses 7 through 10. During that period, he will deceive all the nations of the earth, and many people who had a part in that second resurrection will make a free-willed choice to align themselves with Satan. The angel in chapter 14, verse 7 says with a loud voice, "Fear God, give him glory, for the hour has come when he will pass judgment." That warning appears to be given to all who are living on earth at the end of the 1,000-year reign of restoration. All those who heed the warning will be the ones whose names will be found in the book of life. By contrast, in chapter 14, verses 17 through 20, Yochanan speaks of yet another angel who came out of the temple in heaven, and he had a sharp sickle. Then out of the altar went yet another angel who was in charge of the fire, and he called in a loud voice to the one with the sharp sickle, "Use your sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because they are ripe." The angel swung his sickle down on the earth, gathered the earth's grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's fury. The winepress was trodden outside the city, and the blood flowed from the winepress as high as the horses' bridles. This angel also appears, but his task is opposite from the Son of Man, who in verses 14 through 16 was actually harvesting the people as part of the second resurrection. By contrast, the angel in verses 17 through 20 is gathering the grapes that are to be thrown into the winepress of God's fury. It appears to be the fulfillment of Revelation chapter 20, verses 7 through 10, which is when the adversary is let loose. And once again in 20 verse 8 it says, "He will go out and deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle." This is also explained in graphic detail in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39, which relate directly to the words of Revelation 14 verse 20. The words of Revelation 14 verses 19 and 20 also reflect Isaiah 63 verses 1 to 6, where Yeshua returns from destruction of the entire nation of Edom, where in 63 verse 2 Isaiah asks, "Who is this coming from Edom, from Botzra, with his clothing stained crimson?" Yes, it is Yeshua, who, as a final task, destroys all who have been held his people Israel in contempt since they first became a nation. So like Satan and his cohort, all Edom and all others continuing to hold Yahweh in contempt will be removed from the universe forever. Now that brings us to the end of Revelation chapter 14. As we have seen, by placing the various angelic statements together in a chronological order, it is possible to see how Yeshua and the angelic force will re-establish the order both in heaven and on earth. Then when his restoration has been completed, Yeshua will hand all things back to his Father, and Yahweh and Yeshua will once again become one in rulership, both in heaven and on earth. So the remaining chapters in Revelation are devoted to detailing what we have considered up to this point. Chapter 15 itself is a preamble of chapter 16. And then in chapter 17, it provides much more detail on how the beast who comes up out of the sea comes into being and how it will impact on mankind at the time of Yeshua's return. So until we meet again, Shabbat Shalom.